here in Kochi. I was here 2 months ago, as Kochi mentioned, at the TiE conference that had a wonderful turnout of 1,200 people. The president of TiE Kerala is over here in the back. His Holiness John Paul, at least that's what I call him. And it's great to be here in a state that boasts the highest literacy rate in India at 94%, the highest life expectancy in India at 74 years, and also is rated the least corrupt state in the entire country. Well, you know, it's some small solace given that we rank 95th in the world in corruption, but it's still the best of the 95. It's also a state where I spent 37 days, not far from here, filming my movie Before the Rains that was shot by Kerala's own Santosh Sivan. It was filmed in Munnar. And for all of those who have not been in Munnar, show of hands, who have all been in Munnar? Well, that's pretty decent sprinkling, but those of you who are not, you know, if you ever run into a real boring set of sessions during this conference, just take off and go see Munnar. It's a lot nicer. Sorry, Sunny, I know you've planned for no boring conferences, but Munnar is Munnar. But a big hand, let's give a big hand to Sunny, please. Putting together this conference, I know it takes a lot of effort. And for the next day and a half, we'll be doing some serious conferencing at this GOPIO conference. So what's a conference? A gathering of important people who singly can do nothing, but together can decide nothing can be done. But that's not the case here at GOPIO, is it? We're full of people who want to do stuff, academics who do stuff, scientists who do stuff, corporate titans who do stuff, politicians, well, maybe not that. Sorry, Minister. You know, politicians and lawyers are a favorite butt of any stand-up comedian. But we have thinkers, journalists, bureaucrats, investors, venture capitalists, and of course our Indian entrepreneurs who start companies all across the world and live by the mantra of Sir Richard Branson. Screw it, let's do it. So when I was asked to speak today, well, I was asked a couple months ago, to speak about the Indian diaspora, past, present, and future, I said to myself, what is it I can tell you that you probably already don't know? But I channeled Richard Branson and I said, what the heck, let's screw it, let's do it. And I began to do my research. Our diaspora's past and present have been very well analyzed, well documented. And our future, well, we've got lots of experts, lots of prognosticators, just like going to the movies. Everybody's a critic, everybody's got an opinion. But once I started researching the history of our diaspora, I realized there was a lot I didn't know. And I suspect it might also apply to most of it. Much depends on one's own personal perspective, one's socioeconomic strata and status, as well as one's own host country, because that sort of gives one a blinkered view of what our diaspora was, is, and might be. How many of us even know what the word diaspora actually means, and what is its source? Well, very simply put, the source of any diaspora is migration. Let us consider the act of migration for just a moment. It is a phenomenon that has existed over thousands of years, and it happens when people can no longer sustain themselves in their own milieus, and they go out seeking places where their resources are more easily available. In earlier periods, people migrated from one place to another in search of food, shelter, and escape from persecution, like the Jewish people did. Today, people tend to migrate in search of better career opportunities and better quality of life. Migrants take not only their skills with them and expertise, but they take with them their culture, living styles, and what I call a collective memory. Over the ages, this has been the common thread, irrespective of whether, whichever ethnicity, whether it be Jewish, Irish, Italian, Polish, British, German, even Chinese or Indian. The phenomenon that is migration is best captured by what we all have come to know in the word diaspora. This word is a combination of two Greek words, dia, which means through, and kipiera, which means to scatter. So literally, or disperse. So literally, diaspora means scattering or dispersion. It was originally applied about 2,600 years ago in the 6th century BC to refer to the exile of the Jews from Babylon, when they were all kicked out of Babylon. And then it came to apply to all of the Jewish people across the world outside of their homeland, which is Palestine today. But today it has come to mean any group or people who migrate in large numbers and retain their collective memory, along with a myth of return back to the homeland. So there's no unique ambiguity about the term diaspora when it's applied to Jewish people. But when it's applied to other religions and ethnicities, there's some confusion. So it's hard to sometimes make a clear distinction between what is a migration and what is a diaspora. Also, what's a minority and what's a diaspora. For instance, we don't use the word diaspora for the descendants of British people who have settled in Australia, Canada, the United States, South Africa. They're Aussies, they're Kiwis, they're Canadians, they're Americans. They're not referred to as a British diaspora. Nor is the term applied to the Germans who have settled in South America and Central America. In fact, they're often referred to as a minority of superiority, because they have all the commonalities of a diaspora, but they don't have this collective memory and the myth of return. So the Indian diaspora, if you think about all of us, we consist of those of us who are not from, anyway, show of hands again. How many of us are from outside of India? Okay, so that's a very large representation of a diaspora. Nice to see. Let us look at the various conditions that the Indian diaspora fulfills that qualifies us to be a diaspora. Number one, we strongly maintain our family traditions wherever we go. Number two, we are acutely aware of our national origins, but go no further than a sympathetic curiosity about them. But our identity is definitely defined by them. We take an active interest in what's happening in India and also in specific events. Case in point, all the people from abroad who are here. We perpetuate significant aspects of our culture, our traditions, and our language. Most of us speak Hindi, and if not, we certainly speak our mother tongues like Telugu or Gujarati or Bengali. We maintain our traditions for weddings, for Upanayans, and for cremations. And we also maintain our religions, whether it be Hinduism, Sikhism, Islam, etc. Number five, we always maintain regular communications with our friends and family back in India. And number six, we send remittances back home. India, the World Bank's estimate recently, in 2010, Indian remittances came up to 55 billion, and China was in second place. 70 is not a number I can substantiate, because I've got to be able to substantiate the source. The source is the World Bank. We also attempt to influence our home country's government policies. A good case in point is India's diaspora lobbying very strongly with the US Senate to ratify the nuclear treaty.
Shame.
Pardon?
Shame.
Why is it a shame?
Because nuclear is not good for the planet.
Well, all I can say is that we supported, our diaspora supported, the actions taken by our government, which is representative of our country. And it was important to our country to get it done. And so, would you mind waiting for the Q&A to have this little verbal tete-a-tete?
I'm glad you said that. There was no Q&A before lunch, not a single one of them.
Yes.
Practice democracy here.
After the speech, you can proceed.
Are you getting mad at me, sir?
Mad at the organizer for not having Q&A.
But are you mad at me?
Yes, you supported the nuclear agreement.
Okay.
What's getting mad at you?
You know, we'll battle with flintlock pistols outside at 10 paces. That's okay.
That's the American way, not the Indian way.
No, that wasn't American. That's British. Anyway, the history of Indian migration goes back to millennia. Really, when you think about it, the first migrants from India were the Romani people during the times of Kanishka. Originally, Romani, today we refer to them as gypsies as they emigrated out of India to the northwest and eventually settled in Eastern Europe. Another major migration took place around 580. The Cholas were a mighty naval power, conquered most of Southeast Asia, and we still have evidence of the Indianized kingdoms of those days with the royal Brahmin kings of Thailand, the Angkor kingdoms of Cambodia, and what we have in Indonesia, particularly in Bali and Yogyakarta. However, on all of these early migrations, what's interesting, why aren't they part of the diaspora? Well, you really can't. It's not acceptable to call these people who went 1,500 years ago part of our diaspora. Why? Because they have intermingled with the local population to the extent where they've lost that identity and no longer can be referred to as people of Indian origin. However, over the past 2 centuries, we have created arguably the world's most diverse and complex diaspora, forming the modern India diaspora. six continents, 125 countries, estimated at almost 30 million people. And the characteristics of this group varies to an astonishing degree. So much so that it's hard to really have a homogeneous identification of all of the diaspora. So we try to subset them into three groups: the old diaspora, the new diaspora, and the Gulf diaspora. There's one consistent theme to all of them: they're all labor migrations. Started by low-skilled labor in the early 19th century to high-skilled labor migration in the mid to late 20th century. The old diaspora existed from the early 19th century to the end of British rule. Britain abolished slavery in 1834 and was soon followed by France, the Netherlands, and Portugal. Now what did that do? That created a real labor shortage for all of these rubber and sugar plantations in the colonies of these countries. These plantations used to be operated by black slave labor. Well, to meet this demand, the British established a system of indentured labor. They basically swapped slavery for the indentured system. They began exporting Indians to Mauritius. Mauritius was the first recipient of modern India's diaspora, and soon were followed by the Dutch, the French, and the Portuguese. This small-scale migration became a mass movement, and conditions of absolute poverty in India, coupled with some desire to make a little more money for oneself, made this into a real big exodus. Conditions for these journeys, though, were very difficult. Mortality was very high on French, Dutch, and English boats. Almost similar to what happened on slaver boats bringing slaves from Western Africa to the southern plantations of the United States. Mauritius, Suriname, Trinidad, Fiji, they got people from Bihar and UP, and Guyana and East Africa got people primarily from Punjab and Gujarat. And what happened in French colonies is they got mostly people from Tamil Nadu because of the existence of Pondicherry. One interesting point was, through all the way up to World War I, most of these migrants, almost all of them were male. There were no families that were being sent out because this was an indentured bonded labor system. Roughly during the same time, another wave took place, which was to Burma, Malaysia, well at that time Malaya, and Sri Lanka, to run their sugar, tea, and coffee plantations. So by the time of the Second World War, the Indian diaspora was approximately 6 million. Over 1 million of them in Burma alone. And today, this old diaspora, that we call it, constitutes about 60% of our total diaspora, about 18 million people, and is primarily a pre-World War II phenomenon. The new diaspora consists of migrants who left India in large numbers from the mid-60s onwards, to primarily developed countries like the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and the rest of Europe. Around 1900, there were about 500 Indians in the UK and about 700 in the United States. And by World War II, the number had grown to 6,000. That's about all. In Britain, mostly unskilled labor for low wages, and in the US, mostly Sikhs working in California in the field of agriculture. And many factors cause this very de minimis trickle. Why isn't it that we had the waves of immigration go out into these developed nations? Well, let's take the US for an example. They had one of the most draconian immigration laws passed in 1924. Probably one of the most racist immigration laws in the Western world, where immigration was limited to 2% of the ethnicity of the existing population in 1890. This is 34 years later they passed the law. The reason? They were receiving a lot of Jews into the United States after 1890, and they wanted to stop that immigration. Similar situation existed in, and by the way, that law had the effect of stopping immigration from India cold in its tracks. Very few people got in because, remember, there were 6,000 people, and 2% of 6,000 people is 12. So that's how many could immigrate per year. Canada was the same problem. They had a very draconian law that required immigration to occur only if you took a non-stop trip from your country of origin to Canada. And there were no steamships from India or Asia or any place else but Europe that went straight to Canada. So voila. No immigration from any place else but Western Europe. But the landscape began to change after independence. There was a demand for labor, low skill at first, higher skill later. And most of these countries started to open up. The first country, of course, that opened up was the UK, because anyone who belonged to the Commonwealth had free rights to go into the UK and be a member there. But that came to an end in 1962, when the Commonwealth Act was passed, Commonwealth Immigration Act was passed, and immigration was stopped in its tracks. Now, 20 years later, they realized their mistake and opened it up again, and now UK is one of our major countries. The dividing line for Indian immigration in the United States was the year 1965. Lyndon Johnson passed a new law that rescinded the old Hart-Johnson Act and made it possible to immigrate based on qualifications rather than percentage of ethnicity. Just as in the United States, Canada also opened up its rules using similar kinds of methods for immigration and immigration. Migration from India to these countries boomed, and was helped by the 1990 software boom. In 1990, the US Congress passed a law that created the H-1B visa. And today, Indians are far and away the biggest recipient of the H-1B visa to bring talented, skilled people into the United States. The US, the Census Bureau estimates 75% of every Indian working in the United States has a bachelor's degree. Astonishing number. And 69% of everybody working in the United States is in management or in a profession. So today, we have 3 million people in the US, 1.5 million in the UK, and 1 million in Canada, a 20-fold increase in 50 years. Since the 90s, Australia and New Zealand have also become a big target because they need high-skilled English-speaking workers for their IT and other industries. The Indian diaspora in Australia is over 400,000. And so also in New Zealand, the number is growing. In fact, one of the ladies this morning was talking about coming to New Zealand. Beautiful country. I've been there several times. We should go there. Next GOPIO convention should be in New Zealand. That was the new diaspora. And finally, we come to the Gulf diaspora, and we all know that. We're in the state of Kerala that probably provides most of that diaspora. Number's about 5 million now. It was fast growing, but it's now stabilized. And it's basically low-skilled workers who went to the Gulf to work in the oil industry and the construction industry. The common thread between all these three diasporas is that they are labor migrants. And the most recent migration is of skilled workers that went to developed countries, and the old diaspora is the unskilled workers that went as indentured laborers. So what is the future for our diaspora? Well, the answer is not that simple and could more easily be answered by, it depends. It depends on a variety of factors, most of them not within our control. See, ethnic Indians are a small but wealthy minority in the US, UK, and countries of the new diaspora, but they can constitute 40% of the population of countries like Fiji, Trinidad, Guyana, Reunion, and Suriname, and 70% of the population of Mauritius. The new Indian diaspora in the US particularly is very well organized and very powerful because it is wealthy. Indians have demonstrated their increasing political influence with the election of Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, New York Attorney General Preet Bharara, and the formation of the India caucus in both the US Congress and the Senate. Other countries, Indians have seen even a bigger impact. We have 8 members of parliament in the UK Parliament and 8 PIOs who are members of the House of Lords. Canada is the same way. We have 9 MPs in the Canadian House of Commons. It's the success of Indian entrepreneurs, business people. We've got lots of CEOs now who are Indian in both the US and the UK, and IT professionals that has created the recognition of India's intellectual abilities. It has been a major factor in branding India, the way it's branded today, as a source for well-educated, hard-working professionals. Remember, it was no more than 20 years ago when India was not cool. There was no India rising, no India shining, not cool. We were more often thought of as this poverty-ridden country of snake charmers and elephants. PIOs, particularly in the new diaspora, have become known for their entrepreneurship, their economic success, scientific and artistic successes. Let's face it, we're a people who differ in ethnicity, skin color, and religion from most of the host countries' majority populations. That's a fact. Despite the general acceptance of us as ethnic Indians and the increasing coolness of India, we remain potential targets for xenophobia and hate-inspired violence. For instance, in Malaysia, there's always tensions between the dominant Bhumis who are Muslim and the Indians who are Hindu. In Fiji, where 40% of the population is Indian, a democratically elected Prime Minister, Mahendra Chaudhary, was deposed in an ethnic Fijian coup d'etat. The coup was wholeheartedly supported by the Methodist Church, who likened Indian citizens to citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah. And in Trinidad, where the Speaker of the House, an Indian lady called Oka Sepol, was deposed and eventually imprisoned and then gotten rid of, actually, through a movement by the ruling party that was the black ruling party of Trinidad. I'm not trying to be racist, I'm just trying to give you the facts. These discriminations persist not just in countries like Malaysia, Trinidad, and Fiji, but also in countries like the UK and Germany, where skinhead Brits and Germans have clashed violently with people from the subcontinent. In Australia, where attacks on Indian students is occurring at an alarming rate. And even in the United States, which we look at as the model of having Indians integrated, we have demonstrations of the dogbuster gangs of New Jersey and the recent massacre of Sikhs in the Gurdwara in Wisconsin. Having said all this, our diaspora should be a source of pride to all of India. Though Indians live in poverty, appalling poverty, in many places of the world as a result of the indentured labor system, a number of remarkable transformations have taken place over a few generations. Through sheer perseverance, hard work, thrift, and somewhat significantly, a retreat into our own culture. We found forces of sustenance. These Indians successfully labored to give their children, their grandchildren, and great-grandchildren better economic futures. This was true in South Africa, Kenya, Mauritius, Uganda, Suriname, Burma, notwithstanding the resentment of the local population. If Indians appear to have done well for themselves within the economic domain of these old diaspora countries, our affluence in new diaspora countries like the United States is even more pronounced. Taking the country as a whole, our share of the population in the US is 1%, just under 1%, 3 million out of 320 million. But our share of scientists, engineers, and software specialists is 5%. And our share of the doctors is almost 10%. No group, not whites, not the Chinese, or the Jewish people, have a higher median household income than us Indians. We're 80% higher than the average in the United States. Indeed, when India was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy 20 years ago, I would argue that the flood of such success stories from outside of India, coming from our diaspora, helped to lay the groundwork for the abolition of the senseless restrictions, the license drives that we used to have in those days. The effective lobbying by our diaspora triggered eventually our liberal reforms, I would argue, and turned us into what we think we can be, which is an economic juggernaut. Who of us can forget the clarion call of Desh Bachao, DOT Hatao? You remember that? It was by two software tycoons from California. And that's what helped India go in the telephone world from worst to first. We could argue India is first in the world of telephony. So India's recent history is somewhat analogous to what happened in Japan 150 years ago. The Meiji Restoration, Emperor Meiji ended the shogunate, and then exported a number of talented Japanese to the United States and the UK to bring back ideas that transformed Japan from a feudal society to a market-driven one. In fact, one could argue that our diaspora has had the same effect, except that we have done it in spite of our government, not because of it. You can get a round of applause for that? Well, I'm desperate. I'm milking the crowd, I guess. Well, just finally, experts predict India will be the most populous nation on earth. I don't know if it will be the most powerful nation on earth, but it will certainly be the most populous nation on earth by the year 2050. Our population will be very young and therefore very mobile. And given the conundrum of an expanding middle class juxtaposed against the abject poverty of about half of our country, migration patterns, I believe, will accelerate. Notwithstanding discrimination, xenophobia, and exclusion in many countries, our diaspora has added 10 million to our numbers in the last decade alone, gone from 20 to about 30. And this will continue because of the migration of highly skilled professionals, the phenomenon of exporting cheap labor, and illegal immigration to new diaspora countries. So as I look back, and I try to look forward, about our diaspora, I'm reminded about Omar Khayyam's famous 4-line poem from his signature work, Rubaiya. And here's how I'd like to end it with. The moving finger writes, and having read, moves on, nor all thy piety and wit shall lure back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word. Thank you all very much.